Welcome to Leading Minds Revealed, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how today's top leaders harness the power of mindfulness to conquer the fast-paced, ever-changing world of business. In each episode, we sit down with C-suite executives and leaders who share their strategies for navigating rapid change with skill and clarity. Join us as we uncover the transformative mindsets that drive extraordinary leadership. These insights aren't found in business books, and they'll revolutionize the way you lead. And now, here's your host, Michael Apollo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. In today's conversation, we are diving into one of the most urgent and misunderstood leadership challenges of our time: how leaders can navigate the rapid acceleration of AI. In this episode, you will learn what AI fluency actually means and how it differs from AI literacy, the skills leaders urgently need to guide their organizations through rapid technological change, why many companies are currently misreading AI's impact on the workforce, and how to build cultures of adaptive learning, critical thinking, and human connection. My guest today has been at the forefront of technology transformation for nearly 4 decades. He began his career in artificial intelligence in the late 80s, built his foundation at IBM, scaled teams and enterprise technology as a CIO, and most recently built and led the AI practice at Rackspace. He is now the founder of Right Brain Labs, where he advises CEOs on AI transformation. With that, meet my guest, Srini Koushik. Srini, so lovely to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be on this podcast, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise, very much so. And before we jump into the heart of the conversation, I want to share something from our recent discussion that really stood out for me. You mentioned that AI isn't just another technology wave, that it fundamentally changes how humans and machines collaborate. And so this comes up often in discussions I have, that AI is different, different than mobile phones, different than the internet, different than, like in cloud computing, for example. So how is it different? And what do you mean by that it's going to change how humans and machines collaborate?
It's a great place to get started, because I think one of the biggest mistakes that leaders today make is to kind of think about AI as another technology. And the way I describe it is pretty simple. For the last 40 years, I've been in this technology space. I'm looking back and saying computers have been teaching us how to talk to them, because computers understand zeros and ones. And in order to communicate and try to get them to do something we want, we have to talk in a language they understand. And that's spawned a huge technology industry over the last 30 years where, whether it's COBOL or Python or any of these languages that evolved, think about it this way. That's a machine teaching you how to talk to it, right? And which also means that in order for me to just get something very simple done, I got to translate it into something that it understands, a set of requirements that gets translated into code that then gets compiled into or interpreted by a particular infrastructure. So it's a tedious process. It's been very helpful to humanity, but it's been a tedious process. For the first time with AI, we can talk to computers in our language. So those computers have started to understand us. And why that's groundbreaking for me, it's just game-changing, because now all of those translations that you had to do, right, to get something very simple, you just want to add 1 + 1. I got to write a code for it and all of those other things and translate it. Just that, you can communicate directly with the computer. That just opens up significant opportunities, right? And I think the change, unlike some of the waves we've gone through, are pretty phenomenal, right? When you think about internet and mobile and cloud computing, but they were all linear in nature, right? It was a 1x to 2x, 2x to 4x type of thing. We're talking about an exponential change. It really means every single individual should be able to use AI, and that way get things that they want to do by speaking the language that they know and they're familiar with.
I was recently watching a documentary with Demis Hassabis, the CEO of DeepMind or Google DeepMind. And what struck me was this, very aligned to what you're saying, how the interaction is a very human interaction. And that is really the cornerstone of AI, right? And there's agents and there's all these various different ways you can integrate these AI into an organization, to operational workflows, et cetera, which does require some of the technical proficiency. But for the mass population, the way that is designed is to really understand human language and to interpret that. So it's really interesting thinking about this as a very relational technology. So it's fundamentally different. And so when you look at the next, 2 to 4 years, what do you see leaders, people like senior executives, people who are leading teams, misunderstanding most about AI?
Yeah, I think it's great. First thing is, when you start with the assumption that this is just another technology, you try to use the same old playbook, right? Let's go figure this out. Let's talk to the vendors that have helped us so far. Let's go to the IT department, ask them to do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, right? Those things are still relevant because, as you pointed out, there's a certain level of technology. Although I would argue that building agents today is mostly no code, low code, as opposed to how much code I had to write even 5 years ago. So it's changing in all elements. But back to the point I was trying to make. I think the first mistake they make is to assume this is another technology. I think AI, for the first time, everyone from a CEO of a company to the security guard who's manning that security desk in the front of that building, has to be AI aware. They absolutely have to be AI aware, because each of them have a role to play. Let's leave the CEO alone for a second. Head of HR. They have to manage talent. They have to make sure that they're, dealing with the onboarding of employees and making sure that their career progression happens, and others. There's a lot of things that need to get done. And given how information dependent our industries have become, everything depends on technology. And so, imagine taking all of these roles, and if I can actually communicate with AI to get things done. Again, I know I'm not talking science fiction, right? You could probably do 70% of it today. And with the pace at which this is evolving, that's going to happen very quickly. That's why I've been pushing AI fluency at all levels, because while the technology is not there today, if you just look to the last 3 years, it's going to get there very soon. And humans are the slowest to learn. So let's take the opportunity to get ahead so that we can harness the power of AI for anything we want to do. If it's in the personal life, let's do it there, right? If it's actually as a marketing lead, I want to get those things used, let's do that, right? And if I'm a software engineer and I want to use AI to write better code, high quality code, much better and much faster, let's use it there. AI fluency is something that everyone in the organization has to focus on.
Yeah, in terms of adoption, it's pretty incredible. I think a recent statistic shared that OpenAI, ChatGPT in particular, had somewhere around not over almost 1 trillion weekly users on the platform, up from just 1 million a few years ago. Right. So when we look at the speed at which that's happening, it's quite remarkable. And something I want to dive in a little bit here too, this biggest misunderstanding being that, viewing AI as just another piece of technology, but the importance of understanding that we all need to be AI aware now. For example, it's embedded in everything I do on a day-to-day basis. Pretty much every single platform that I engage in, from the meeting assistants that join every single one of my meetings, to now my Asana project management tool, which now has a full-on AI underpinning to it, to everything that I do through my podcasting. It's integrated into the video editing, into outreach, into all these things, right? Email, etc.
You take a selfie on your iPhone today, AI is automatically adjusting the aperture and if you're missing somebody in your selfie, it expands it to include them. So AI is embedded in everything. Yeah.
And so what I'd like to explore is, and I know you're really big on this, and you often say that organizations must train their people as much as their models. Okay. And I want to explore that. I think there's a lot that we can unpack there. And one of the big things is, been having some conversations, and it seemed like the most advanced departments within organizations or divisions are like is where the CIO exists and the tech teams, right? And adoption in there is uniquely fast because it's just, I think part and parcel with the business and the day to day. But if we take a moment to go beyond that department, when you look at an executive who is tasked with adapting their organization and their organization adopting AI. So let's just say it could be on a sales side, it could be on a client support side, it could be in an operations, a role. What are some of the key challenges that you've noticed these executives facing right now, currently, in bringing that type of adaptation and adoption to their organization?
There's a few things that executives and leaders have to kind of wrestle with. First of all, like we talked about the fact that AI is getting embedded into everything around us, right? Everything has got some element of AI in it, and if it's not there, they're rushing to get it added to it. So if that's the case, most leaders just tend to think of AI as a ChatGPT or a Microsoft Copilot or something like that. Oh, we use Microsoft Copilot. I think that's very, very short-sighted. If it's everywhere around you, and Asana is using it, and Salesforce is using it, and when I when I start up my Zoom, there's an AI companion that pops up, right? If that's the case, thinking about AI as just ChatGPT is a very short-sighted view of things. In that, because AI gets embedded everywhere, so you actually do have to have a broader understanding. It's not much deeper. I'm not asking CEOs to start understanding large language models and others, but if AI is everywhere, the opportunities are everywhere, and so are the risks, right? So if it's embedded in everything, I think one of the ways for executives to start thinking about it is it's that with great power comes great responsibility, the Spider-Man thing, right? Because it is great powers, because it does open up so many opportunities in everything that we do from a business standpoint, but also in our personal lives. But every single time you use it, there's a separate risk that has to come in. And so I think when you start thinking about rolling out and getting your workforce, including yourself as an executive, AI aware, it is not just that, oh, I know OpenAI and I know Microsoft Copilot and those types of things. It's really understanding the responsible use of AI. It's simple things like this. I'm very passionate about sustainability. And if you truly understood the cost of that query, or the cost of you writing a prompt to generate a picture of Elon Musk and the other leaders playing cards or smoking a cigarette in a parking lot, if you were a conscious consumer, you probably wouldn't do that because of the amount of water that was wasted and others in it. So I think there's a level of awareness that people have to have so that they become responsible users of AI. Clearly, the risks of misinformation, taking things at face value, those types of things. So when I talk about AI fluency, it is raising that level. It is raising that level. That level of basic understanding that just says, take it for what it is. It is an extremely powerful tool that has tremendous risks associated with it. But if you're educated and you're fluent on what those risks are, you can basically use it in a much more responsible way. And that is key, because as AI gets embedded into everything, that is going to be a challenge that we have to work through. So that's kind of the reason why I think getting people to start recognizing that it is different. It is not a technology. It is different. It changes everything that you do. And you personally as a leader have to get involved. It's so that you are helping not just yourself and your leadership team, but your workforce make that transition. You have to invest in people. You just can't keep building the next model and the next model and leave the people behind. And I think you have to be able to do that if you want people to kind of become responsible users of AI and start leveraging that thing. You're always going to have roles for people. The question is, can we get them to the point where they can use it and use it effectively to do whatever it is they want to be able to do?
So what I'm hearing there is there's like three core challenges that executives are being faced with. The first is being myopic around what it is, right? It's a simple chatbot. Okay. And I've heard this already with some of the organizations I've worked with and some people, some, employees and other leaders that I've connected with. I asked them, okay, so how are things? Well, first off, I asked them, okay, so how's it going? And they say, well, I'm very scared. I don't like this technology. I don't want to use this technology, right? There's this hesitance. There's also a distrust, right? And then I ask, okay, well, so how has your organization rolled it out? Oh, we received an email to start experimenting with this ChatGPT. And so, and what else? That's all. That's all we've got. Okay. So, okay. Very interesting. So I think that validates like being myopic. This is just this is just OpenAI's ChatGPT, right? Another thing is this not being on the front lines of it. So not actually being on the ground level and leading this charge, really listening to your people, listening to the customers, really experimenting and fostering this very sort of agile approach where you can just continuously experiment and iterate and prototype and explore in an ongoing way and grow. And then it seems like the third part, the third challenge is not supporting and being there for your workforce. So it's almost like being myopic as a leader, not really seeing the breadth of what this current scenario is, this current change is, because change happens all the time. This is just another one. The second piece is not being on the vanguard of it and leading the change. And then the third piece is not supporting your people with the change. So I want to dive into maybe just some of like what you're hearing from the organizations, the workforce, and some sentiment that's coming up from your perspective, because I've just digested a number of reports. McKinsey, Wharton had a really great AI report, and we'll include it into the description here, just released. And just looking at, there's a lot of distrust. It validates some of the conversations I've been having, some of the sentiment I've been seeing. They don't feel that their leaders are doing a good job. They don't feel that they actually have an idea of what they're doing. And there is a hesitance because there's a bit of a fear of what this is going to mean for them in the longer run. Is that what you're hearing? And what are some of these challenges that you're noticing, and what can we do about it?
It's really your response, but it's a yes and. Okay, so the way I'm hearing it from the general workforce in general, but also the leadership in specific, right? Like what you have are the two ends of a dumbbell, right? On the one end, you have leaders, people who have got 10 years of experience, 15 years of experience, and a majority of them are either experimenting, or you hear the sentiment of I don't trust it, I don't think it can do the job as well as I do. Everything I'm hearing about it is a doomsday scenario, like I'm not there and others. That's a different challenge, right? It's really a different challenge because it is about getting. Chris Argyris wrote a report, like one of my favorite authors. He's written like several papers on how do you teach smart people how to learn, right? And these are smart people who've been in this space, and that really means that you have to unlearn certain things to relearn things in a open feedback loop that comes in. That's the way you have to treat them. So on the one end, you have these leaders, which is kind of what's getting reflected in the McKinsey surveys and other types of things, because they all go out and talk to these guys who've got titles, and they ask them about it, and they ask the next level and others. The other end of the barbell is on the left-hand side. Like that's the young kids coming out of college or like people going through school, right? Completely different problem. they are not afraid of the technology. They use it. They've grown up. Next generation is growing up with it. They're not afraid of the technology, right? They are essentially just using it every single day in their day-to-day life. And they show up in an organization and go like, where did I just land? Right. Or these days, it's even worse because like the guys who are on the right-hand side are thinking about it saying, oh, this is another technology. So I got to do the same thing. This is a talent war. I don't need these people coming out of college. I got to figure out how I can go and poach from my competition and pay them extra money to get this stuff. Right. So it's fascinating to watch it because on the right hand side with these smart leaders, it is about how do you get them to become more familiar with technology? How do you get them to be more hands-on with this thing, right? Because if you want to become a tennis player, you don't become one by reading a manual or watching Sampras or Agassi play. It tells you how old I am, right? But you don't get there watching Djokovic and Nadal play. You actually have to get on a court and practice. So you don't become AI aware or AI fluent or by sitting on the sideline and reading a McKinsey or a Bain consulting report. You have to get involved. So you got to get them into the field that way, the leaders. But on the other end, you've got to be able to harness that innovation coming out of these young workforce that's coming in, but actually give them the guardrails so that they can protect themselves not only in their personal lives, but at work, right? So you are giving them the freedom to innovate because they're not afraid of the technology. They're constantly on this front. How do you actually put them into an environment that allows them to grow? And that common thread that connects these two barbells for me is AI fluency, right? It's that AI fluency because on one end, AI fluency means know the risks, know about how to use it safely, responsible use, those types of things. On the other end, it's like, come on, get off the sidelines and start using this. Start thinking about how you could take an existing business process and not re-engineer it, right? Like re-engineering, we've done it over and over again. How can you reimagine this thing, right? Like what does that reimagined process look like when it's enabled by AI? And that is completely different than that. Because I'll just leave this segment with that thought. If you just use AI to automate things that could have been automated with robotic process automation, whatever it is, I can tell you right now, as of today, that is 15 to 20 times more expensive than using the old tool to do it. That's kind of like taking like in a semi-automatic rifle into one where a pea shooter would have done, right? And that's again a lack of understanding of the technology or these technologists saying, you know what, this is pretty cool. I'm just going to throw this at it, and then MIT comes out and says 80% of these projects fail. No kidding. It does because they were using it they're using the wrong AI solution and they were using it to solve the wrong problems because they were not AI fluent. So let's get back to the core of it, which is if you get people to become a lot more aware and understanding of the technology, we're going to see a lot more effective solutions. You're going to see better solutions by investing there than investing in the next LLM coming out. That's only going to make these value guys richer.
What came up for me was this, just to put it, like to ground it into a functional application. Like what does it mean to bring that semi-automatic rifle to a pea shooter, this type of situation where you need a pea shooter? It was this, I think when I took your AI fluency test there, which was really, really interesting. We'll definitely add the link into the description. There was a question like, okay, in this situation that you can handle it with a spreadsheet and the simple calculations that you can utilize that software for, do you bring in AI to just handle everything that could be done in there? And I started laughing is because I actually tried to, outsource a lot of cash flow calculations to AI, and it just required so much work. And but yeah, you could get there, but it almost seemed like, ChatGPT was the platform I was using, just wanted to do so much more. And then I was like, okay, well, I could just, here's the formulas and here's the simple, calculations, and it was just fine. So I think thinking about that, is important. It's simple, but then also from a sustainability side, we have these automated tools already that have been innovated that do just a good enough job. Now, how do we dream big? And I love that approach. So I would like to go in and just make that distinction between AI literacy and AI fluency. I know this is, something that we've been speaking about here. And I have a feeling that you can do that rather quick. And then maybe just walk me through the core components of this AI fluency model that you have.
Look, I've used this analogy several times. I'll just use it very quickly here again. I think the word fluency is a really good launch point into the distinction, right? I think we all speak one or two languages. If you're if you're from Canada, you're most likely speaking some version of French and English, and you're able to get around, right? But we know when you speak multiple languages, you're fluent in some languages and you are literate in others, right? So take me, for instance. English is my first language at this stage, but I am literate in Spanish. I can understand the words, I can understand the sentence construction, but I couldn't speak in Spanish to save my life, right? And but literate gets me around enough to kind of do the bare bone things. But recently, I was in India. I speak 3 Indian languages. I can go to that state, and I'm fluent in those languages. And I can look like a local, going into those states speaking those languages. Think about that with AI. Today, most people are either AI fearful, which is on the left-hand side, which you talked about, or most of them are somewhere in the middle. They've used ChatGPT. They've probably asked it for a recipe. They've asked it for travel plans. They're literate because they all know ChatGPT. But even that has to be a little bit more knowledgeable because and then AI fluent on the other end is when you truly understand the tools and what can be used for what and others, you get to a different level of understanding of how you can use AI. And just to kind of finish that point, even in the AI illiterate, most people just use ChatGPT and stick with it. But if you knew that a Claude has different strengths than a Gemini, has different strengths than a ChatGPT versus a Perplexity, then you would choose the right tool for the job, right? You're not going to go and try to, you're not going to go try to put a screw into a wood plank using a hammer. You're going to use a screwdriver for that. Right? But you'll use a hammer if you're banging a nail into that same plank. So knowing what tool to use is important, and that's part of basic understanding that goes beyond literacy into fluency because you know the risks and you know how to be able to use that. And I think that basic level of understanding has to happen on both sides of that barbell I talked about. Right? You absolutely have to do it. It's probably easier to do with the next generation coming in because they probably tried more tools than you can list. But on the other end, it's like, that myopic view that I said, right, really is tough to kind of break through and get them to say, like, look, you got to kind of use the right tools for the right job on that front. And by the way, just so that the audience doesn't get confused, all of our conversation so far has just been on generative AI, right? Like, the chat GPTs and others. When you start thinking about generative AI, here's the simplest way I tell people. Generative AI is probabilistic. What that really means is the way the LLM models work, if you ask it the same question 3 times, you're not going to get exactly the same answer. It's because it's picking the words and making that sentence construction so that you have that response. No core business process can operate on a probabilistic model. Think about that customer service representative that you're calling in for a billing question. And you happen to get disconnected and you call the second time. You want the same answer. Business processes require deterministic answers. So I've got to be able to get to a constant answer on that piece. One of that big reason why the 85% of projects fail and all those things is because people not knowing the tools, using something like generative AI to solve a deterministic problem. There are multiple options in AI, but knowing that is important. And knowing that, by the way, is extremely important if you're an executive, because you're the person making the choice to say, do this versus that. And that's why, back to this AI fluency, it applies to every level of the organization.
I'd love for you to, just because you brought it up here on the basic level, what's your, well, 2 things here. We spoke about this in the past that the speed at which these models are changing and this exponential growth is happening, it can seem daunting for many executives who've been established as, subject matter experts in their domains for many years to try to keep up to date on that. So, on one side, love to hear like what is your recommendation for maintaining AI literacy as the language is literally changing as we speak, and also when you think about some of those core Claude, Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, what's your sort of quick fire breakdown of which of the models you would use for what?
Let me start with the second question. It's faster to answer, right? And then let's go back to the first one. This is how Srini uses it. I think for any engineering task, I start with Claude, right? If it's software engineering, so you visited my website. Everything, the front end, back end, the design, everything else was done by one person, me, with AI, and that was Claude. Right? Claude basically helping me through it, guiding me like as a person who's not written a line of code in 25 years. In about 5 days, I had that website up and running. Not only that, deployed into AWS, running at a certain level that, so I think Claude is one of the best tools because the Sonnet model and the Opus model that underlies Claude are trained on that particular information, the right types of code and others. So it's very good in engineering and compute tasks and things like that. They are very, very good at that. Gemini is trained on a lot of really good information like Google Photos and everything else that they use to be able to do that. Gemini is actually very good for writing copy. Generating images. Their latest Gemini Pro 3, the model is phenomenal in terms of what it can do. So like they're just top notch. I know there's Midjourney and everything else that people use, but when you want to go after something very, very specific, Gemini is very good at that, writing copy, converting it into other media formats, right? You have a file, you could use something like Notebook LLM to kind of make it into a podcast with 3 people talking, so it is fantastic for that new media capabilities, and that's that. ChatGPT is trained on the world's information. It's trained on pretty much everything, right? And that includes all the good and all the bad. So I think, to me, ChatGPT is more like that Swiss Army knife, right? But which I could use for a general quick query. But I hardly use ChatGPT anymore because of the models and others. I've got other reasons, but like it's one I don't think I've used it in the last 4 to 5 months. Every time they release a new model, I'll go check it out and see how well it does. But that's it. And then finally, for me, Perplexity is the fourth one that rounds it out for me. Because Perplexity, just given the fact that they cite sources, they're actually leading in terms of how they do agentic implementations on the back end and others. Always gives me a chance to go back and validate it. If I got some copy from Google that I want to kind of validate or second check, I'd go to a Perplexity and give it to it and say, what do you think? And it's going to come at it from a different angle and point out that, hey, these 6 things are good, but these 3 you missed. And by the way, here are some good sources for you to go take a look at it. So I think when I look at myself, I predominantly spend 95% of my time with these 3 things that I talked about: Claude, Gemini, and Perplexity, and very little time on ChatGPT. ChatGPT is really more of not to fall behind. What are they coming up with? What's next with them? When you see all of them, when you see them releasing things like, oh, we're starting our own consulting business or something like that, just go check it out to see what they do. So I think that's the way I tend to use the tools. Going back to the, let me tell you a little bit more about how I look at staying abreast. And I think my fault, I skipped over that question. What makes up AI fluency for me, right? And because you guys are familiar with the Simon Sinek model. You got to always start with the why, and then like the how matters, and then the what is what we end up doing. I think what AI has done is, like, number one, the why never changes. If you're a business, you want to get more efficient, you want to differentiate yourself, those things. The why is always the thing. If you're an environmentalist, you want to protect the environment. The why is it doesn't change. increasingly with AI, the what becomes irrelevant. I just told you, here's a 62-year-old guy who's not written a lick of code in 25 years. I can go write code today, right? You just need to know how to use it. So how to use it and what are the right things to, what are the wrong things to stay away from, and other types of things. So the what is increasingly being taken over by AI, right? So what makes us human is the how. The why and the how is what makes us different. And to me, the how of AI fluency comes down to 5 skills, right? Number 1, you got to stay current with technology. And we can cover that later, but you got to stay current with technology, not to kind of become experts at it, just to know what's going on. Because if there's a new thing that comes out, knowing that that exists and it can be part of your toolkit is pretty important. So that's one. The second piece is critical thinking. This is the always standard, ask the 5 W's, right? Why, what, who, or the 5 Whys, like whatever it is you want, you consider that. You've got to be able to use the critical thinking, because that allows you to question AI. It asks you to make sure that you're asking the right questions, not just relying on the answers it's giving you. That's critical thinking. And if it's critical thinking, then the third skill you have to have is problem solving, right? Because you're not going to, I keep using the example of me writing code. It wasn't that simple, right? Every 4th step you ran into an obstacle and you had to problem solve. You had to problem solve it for that piece and drive that. And that's a core human skill, problem solving. We all know how to do it. Depending on which discipline you're in, there's decision trees or root cause analysis, things that made us that piece. You got to kind of reinforce those skills even more in the age of AI. Number 4 for me is you actually have to be an adaptive learner, right? Don't get stuck on, if something made you successful for the last 30 years, this is back to these smart people learning how to, they're very reluctant to go back and unlearn. In this age, you got to be very, very quick at adapting. You have to be able to say, look, that worked last year. That worked actually in second quarters this year. It doesn't work anymore for me, because there's a better way to do it today, because the underlying what has changed, the tools have changed, and the capabilities have evolved. And then the last piece of it is actually very important. It is the human AI collaboration component of it. How do you interact with it? Do you just use it as a tool? When do you use it as a coworker? When do you use it as an assistant? When do you use it in that? And how do you interact? And make sure that those interactions are very relevant to you personally, are important. So those 5 skills are what makes up the core of AI. Notice I didn't say which LLM, which agentic architecture, and others. That's the what. It'll get taken care of.
Yeah, very interesting. And I was speaking recently with the CIO of US Bank, who led their AI integration, Mo James, I believe. And he, he was speaking about how important the implementing a change management approach to, and how important that is, especially now, and it seems like what's interesting is that there's going to be an explosion of all this change that needs to happen across all these different organizations. And I just don't know how across the board, there's going to be a leveling up at the speed at which the technology is going. I think it's going to be gradual, and different countries are approaching it gradually in different ways. I found out recently, out of all the OECD, these economically established countries, Canada, where I'm based, is in the last place in terms of adoption, right? And I can imagine US is somewhere in the lead. When we look at this sort of rolling this out sequentially throughout organizations, is this something that they can handle completely internally? Is this what is the approach that they should be thinking about to help bolster this understanding? I think of it as, well, there needs to be an awareness of how the people how their workforce is relating to this technology. How is it using this technology or not? There has to be almost like a leveling up of the leadership on how to be able to coach adaptive learning. And there needs to be this sort of recursive, ongoing loop, information loop between the executives team and the leaders and the workforce to have this to be continuously informed with what's happening and where things going to go. You know, how to do that in the most skillful way. What are your thoughts?
Look, I should have started with the disclaimer that if you want to talk to an expert, don't talk to me. Like, I'm learning just like everybody else, and I'm trying to be that adaptive learner. I can tell you this: I think, having been in corporate America for the entirety of my career, we use the word change management, but it typically just comes down to, let's get these people into a training session, let's get them into this piece, let's get them to use it, let's watch how they adopt it, and things like that. I think in order to do change management for AI, we've got to kind of go back to the roots of change management, right? They can say, if you want people to do something or like take a certain action, like the theory would suggest that you got to do two things. You've got to kind of deal with people don't want to change because they've got two fears. One is survival anxiety, and the other one is learning anxiety, right? Survival anxiety is very simple. Is this going to take away my job? What's going to happen to my job in the future? If anything new is coming in, is this, it doesn't matter if it was outsourcing 25 years ago or any of that stuff. It's survival anxiety is a part of any role. And the other one is learning anxiety, which is, is this brand new? I'm afraid of it. I don't know if I can learn it. I've learned to do this way for 20 years. And how do I come back to it? And I think recognizing that, so I would say even before that, as an organization, based on their values, you got to determine whether you want to bring your people along or leave them behind, right? I'm not placing a value judgment on leaders one way or the other, but there are enough leaders who want to bring their people along. They're the companies that have been around for a very long time. They're not the guys who come in and they're gone in 10 years or something like that, but there are companies that have been great for a long period of time that have recognized the importance of that human capital they have inside of that. If you start there, which let's just assume that's 80% of the companies that want to start there, that's great. That's a great place to start. Then you've got to start thinking about how do you address survival and learning anxiety when it comes to AI, right? And I think then that's where that first step of AI fluency comes in. Because for survival anxiety, if I don't know what AI is or how I am going to use it within my company, you can't blame them for saying, like, because they're reading the same things we are and they look at it and go, AI is going to replace all these jobs and others. And it's like, unless we bring our people along and help them be part of that change, it's not going to happen. And then the learning anxiety component of it, again, I gave you my 5 competencies, like, just have one for your company, right? If you want to use mine's all open source, use it, right? But if it's not, then create one for yourself, and essentially make sure that you're sticking with it. A lot of things that you talked about are very relevant still. The Cotter model of, identify wins and celebrate the wins, those types of things. Have a self-reinforcing learning loop where, like, the people who got things done come back and share that, and they recruit other people to join in. Those are all the mechanics of how you make the org change management happen. But it really starts with, are you investing in your people? And then if you are, then how do I specifically address survival and learning anxiety in my organization? And it starts there. And once you start there, I think then the path becomes easier. It's not going to become easy ever. It's always going to be easier because you kind of know what your North Star is and you're headed that way.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so rich because when we look at anxiety just in general and survival anxiety, which I would say is you could capture it as the big word stress and chronic stress. It's that it elicits so much within us where we actually become even more myopic. And when we're caught in the grips of that, we get really honed in and things that we anticipate are challenging become overblown in terms of their negativity based on what our fixation is compared to anything else. So it actually becomes even harder to see, the upside of whatever it is that we're exploring. So this is working with human psychology in a really big way while also really holding the operational element. So I think there's going to be a real reckoning when it comes to workforces and how they support their people. And I want to just maybe explore that a little bit here around, like, an idea that sort of has come up in our discussions, and even in this, in this episode, that AI can make machines better, and so humans can become better humans, almost, in a sense, too. And it's almost like, how do we, if AI and technology is moving through this exponential transformation, all the platforms we use, etc. And so, how can we really protect human agency and really understand what it is that are the human capacities that can really play a very powerful role right now? And I think that's part of your competencies. But what does it mean for leaders to protect human agency? Because there is a lot of, as well, on top of that, there's a lot of fear about workforce labor disruption. And I know you have a bit of a different way of thinking about that actually there's going to be more jobs. So there's a lot there.
Well, I think with any of these things, Michael, like, you're going to have both intrinsic and extrinsic factors. The intrinsic factors are what I would say, like, each of us as individuals has to focus on. You're going to want to have to change, or at least learn more about it, so that you can be effective, right? I know that with the survival anxiety, the stress becomes ours, and you start amplifying it. But part of the reason why they like, if there's one of the treatments for things like stress and anxiety ends up being meditation, deep breathing, and others is like, step back, like, don't let that become that small thing that don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Step back, think about it, like, look at the bigger picture type of thing. And I think that has to start intrinsic behaviors. The other piece that's intrinsic is, for you to become or build some capability, you have to practice, right? It has to become a habit. And I sometimes, like, I used to work at a mental health company. So, like, and I sound like I kind of came from there. Like, cognitive behavioral therapy is the only way that you get out of it, right? You have to be able to practice it. You have to be able to kind of mindfully practice things for you to be able to get at it. That intrinsic part has to start with each one of us. I can say stuff, but unless you buy into it yourself, you're not going to go out and practice. What organizations can focus on are the extrinsic side of it, right? Which is essentially, from their end, be able to be very articulate, not just parrot what they're hearing from these management consultants or from these reports. You pointed out the Wharton study and others. They have phenomenal information that's coming out. You've got to be able to understand that, to translate it to your workforce, right? I think the last time we talked, I talked to you about a Penn State study that had come out that said people are using ChatGPT for a period of time. And then they had a second test set of people read the content coming out from people using ChatGPT and others who wrote the content themselves. And universally, the people, it was a blind test. They didn't know where the content came from. They said the value coming out of the ChatGPT reports were not useful at all. They were not insightful. It was just generic crap that they didn't get any insights from. But the human side of it, they were able to get that, right? And I think recognizing that, when you keep using content like that, cognitive decline happens. So everything just becomes vanilla and average. Those things are critical, so that if you're a leader in an organization, is that what I'm doing? Because if I'm going to put AI in and I'm going to drive everything I've got to a commodity, that doesn't align with what I'm saying from an outside standpoint, saying I want to be differentiated, I want to have efficiency, and those types of things. So leaders have to be able to take what's happening the outside. Like, they don't have to know, as I said, it's not about the technology. This is a groundbreaking change to everything that you know. Learn more about it so that you can personally translate that. At that stage, then your leadership skills that made you effective, that empathy, that piece all kicks in, and you're able to do that well. But it doesn't start. The empathy and others are not useful unless you understand the problem or the opportunity facing you. I do think that those extrinsic motivations and extrinsic scenarios that need to get set up have to be done at a corporate level. The speed at which you move has to be metered and monitored to make sure that your people are coming along. But I think it's been shown always that a good system with bad people is going to produce average results. A good system with good people is going to produce extraordinary results, right? Like, so if AI is your good system, then let's make sure that you get the people to the point where you're able to get the best out of AI, right? And that's what I meant, like when I say things like, let's use AI to make machines better machines so that humans can be better humans. You got to invest in both sides. You got to invest in the system, and that's where the overinvestment has happened. But you've got to invest in the people.
Srini, thank you so much. Like, so let's just say a leader, one of our listeners here is tuned in and they want to begin preparing their organization for, what's already happening, right? This human AI hybrid team era, and these and the need to become AI aware. Where should they start?
I think there's a lot of really good information. Like Stanford's got an institute on human AI collaboration where you can actually go in and get a lot of really good information to bring yourself up to speed. MIT, you pointed out, MIT's research has been phenomenal. They've got a jobs report that normally comes out that's constantly looking at things that are there. I'd say if you're going to start somewhere, go to these academic institutions because they're like 2 to 3 years ahead. That's kind of what they're thinking about, and they're not influenced by the management consulting dribble that we've peddled for the last 25 years, right? Which is the same thing. It's the faster, better, cheaper that you pick up, and like, oh, there's AI. Let me just add AI as a flavor to everything and then go out and start talking about it, right? I think go back to the source because when you start thinking about like what these universities are doing, they're doing some phenomenal work, right? And in addition, if you're so inclined, some of the most advanced work on human AI collaboration and others is coming out of China, right? It's actually coming out of China. Again, not for this session, but one of the things I've got is, I think I mentioned it to you the last time around, the way I said I use these 3 or 4 tools, right? But I just don't use the 3 or 4 tools. I've set up personas on each of these tools. So inside of Perplexity, I've set up a Srini learning assistant, right? That I'm calling. And what I've done with that particular assistant is essentially given it the capability to say, here are the sources I want to keep track of. Here's the topics I want to be able to go look at. And what it's doing is it's creating my own personal information bubble, right? I'm not based on what I click on Apple News or something like that. It's creating my information bubble that's based on sources that's coming in that drive that. And occasionally you want to break the bubble just to say, okay, what else am I not looking at? Right? And then it's going to give you the alternate. So using these tools to kind of set yourself up, because you don't have to do everything yourself. Being able to recognize that what makes you special is important, but then the rest of the things you have to be able to do, using these AI tools effectively allows you to get those superpowers, right? So I'd say start off with whatever domain you're in. Like you may not be interested in AI at all. You may be interested in the ongoing developments on behavioral health and mental health in this space. There's so many sources that give you that information. Go create one of these in AI so that every day when you get up in the morning, you get a digest of about 20 things that you want to pay attention to. Not somebody else has curated. You've curated it yourself. You can go take a look at it and then very quickly say, I want to dig into this one. Let's go find some more information and learn. Keeping yourself engaged. And that's the practice I keep talking about. You use that on a daily basis. You start to become very, very critical on that. And then do not, and I'd say never, ever forget the power of human connection, right? All of this is great. And interacting with AI might seem like you're interacting with a person, but remember, it's not, right? And being able to have that human connection is still important because at the end of the day, whether you're selling more business or solving a problem or any of those things, that human touch and the human skill is going to be very, very important. And that's something that, at least in the foreseeable future, machines are not going to be able to reproduce. They can try to emulate, but they're not going to be able to do that piece. So I think my message to the audience would be, look, this is not being Pollyanna-ish or any of this stuff. use a half empty or a half full view, whichever you are. Like, you may think AI is bad, you may think AI is good. That's fine. Just get yourself more informed about it, so that if you don't want to use AI, then you'll know where AI is around you, so you can avoid it, right? Or figure out a different way to do it. But if you are interested in it, take the time to go learn and figure out how you can use it more responsibly.
Amazing. Srini, thank you so much. This has been just an incredibly rich conversation. I know that I'm walking away with a lot to think about, a lot to experiment with across different platforms, setting up different personas, thinking about how I'm selective about how I engage with AI from a leadership standpoint, but also from a sustainability standpoint, to really thinking about the responsible and ethical use of the technology, and how to set up a pathway to start supporting my organization and also the organizations that I connect with on a day-to-day basis, and other leaders, on how to bring this forward. And so, very inspiring. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And this brings us to the end of another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.
Leading Minds Revealed podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.